Hey everybody, this is Barry Johnson. Welcome back to another edition of Studio Talk. I've previously done a video on Patchbay where I go over the basic understanding of Patchbay, understanding the various normaling options and what they do, and some normal strategies on how you wire a Patchbay, as well as, go over some basic fundamental understandings of how a Patchbay can help you in your studio. Well, recently, I started downsizing my studio from an I/O perspective. Before where I'm at today, I had 22 inputs and 24 outputs. So most of my hardware was wired into all those inputs, and quite frankly, didn't need as much patching for that because I was able to wire most of them in individually because I had so much I/O. But I decided to upgrade my interface. It had been a long time since I'd done so. Up until this point, I'd been on Pro Tools HD Native with a Avid Omni that has 6 in, 8 out, and then a set of Apogee AD16s and DA16s, which gave me 16 in and out for my hardware. And so I wanted to go back down to, I felt I could go back down to no problem an 8 in, 10 out, which is what the Carbon is. The extra 2 on the 8 out is it has its own separate monitor outputs that don't eat up any of the normal outputs. And then of course, if I want to expand later on, I can do that via ADAT with a multitude of options out there for microphone preamps and the like. So anyway, obviously when I had to rewire my studio for everything, and I've got a video out there where I talk about that, but then I obviously redid this particular Patchbay here. I'm going to be working on this Redco next. I've got a lot of creative ideas for that, and that'll come later. This will be very non-traditional in this one. Most of this is very traditional in the way it's wired up. But so anyway, if you're in a situation to where in your project studio, you're starting to expand and go beyond plugins and you want to add hardware, or you've already begun adding hardware, you already have a ton of outboard hardware, beyond the utilization of plugins, whether it's compressors, EQs, microphone preamps, etc., all the various devices out there that you could ultimately want to utilize in your studio from a hardware perspective. The more you have of that, the more necessary a Patchbay becomes. And so what I hope to do today is to be able to show you, by showing you some very creative ways that I've learned to be able to utilize Patchbay to be able to maximize being able to add a tremendous amount of outboard hardware. I won't say tremendous, but a lot, and get by with only 8 analog inputs and outputs on my interface. And so I'm going to show you how I do that. Now I'm going to warn you right now, the video is a little bit long, but I promise you it will be worth every minute of it. This is what I would call a very valuable video. I would give anything if I'd had something like this all those years ago before I understood Patchbay and knew what they could do for me. I wish I'd had this knowledge back then, because this has become a very indispensable tool in my studio. And so I hope by the end of this video, I'll be able to demonstrate for you just why it's so important. If you fall in the categories I'm talking about, if you have a lot of hardware that you use, I've got there, back, around me, all around me over here. So if you've got a lot of that, or I won't say a lot, but if you've got quite a few pieces and you find yourself patching in and out of those things quite frequently, Patchbay will really, really, really help you do that a lot. So, anyway, let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and let you go on to the video. It may seem a little bit choppy because I had to record this in a few different chunks. I had a few technical errors along the way. So let's just get straight to the video. All right, I'll be honest with you, I'm all over the place on this particular video. So we're back. We've got the Patchbay all properly labeled and everything. We've got those put in there. So now we're good to go. We can see kind of what's happening in the Patchbay. And it certainly makes it easier when you do that. You don't have to memorize anything, obviously, of course. So I'm going to talk about the way I have my Patchbay wired up. I'm going to work on these two first sections first, okay, and then I'll move the camera over to this next set of sections over here, okay. So again, like I said before, there's a reason like these patch cables are in here. It's because I'm actually using these to record this audio right now for the video. I'm actually recording my audio into Pro Tools. And so here I've got my microphone cable going into this Bantam patch cable that's obviously coming from this EVRE20. And so that is going into the input. Remember I talked about before, on a patch bay, the general rule of thumb is whatever you have on whatever you have on the top row, those are outputs of your devices, okay? And everything on the bottom row, those are inputs of your devices. So what I've got going on here is the microphone is going into the bottom row, which is the input of a Great River mic preamp that I have, a 500 series mic preamp that is a Neve clone. Outstanding mic preamp. I love that mic preamp. Then right above it is coming out of that, of the Great River microphone preamp, the output of it. And then I just happened to pick channel 3. I could have picked any channel I wanted, but I picked channel 3 of the input of my interface, which is right over there. Now, I'll talk about those in a second. So that's what you have going on there. I'm going to pull this cable out down here so I can actually use this to kind of as my little pointer, if that's okay. All right. So I'm going to talk about the way I've got these, because in a minute, I'm going to talk to you where I kind of broke the rule a little bit on the inputs and outputs here in a second, but I'll explain why. I'll explain why a little bit later. Okay. So again, on the top here, and I'm not necessarily going to get into what each one of these things are. That's not really important for the sake of it. You'll be able to see it on the screen anyway. You can read it, and I may talk about some of them. But on the top row here, we have output. So we have that Great River mic preamp. We have the WA12, which is an API clone. Then we have a Lindell Evo 6, a Neve 511, a DBX 160. Then Heritage Audio 73 EQ, which is a Neve preamp / Neve EQ clone, and then followed by a Warm Audio 73 EQ, which is basically the same thing. It's a Neve mic preamp clone and EQ clone. And so that's what's on the top row there, and it's just duplicated by the inputs on the bottom row, so it's the same. So what the particular thing on top is the same in the bottom. So and so if you notice here, because you can see on the front here, I have the ability to do my normaling on this particular unit from the front face of the patch bay, whereas on the Redco, I have to do that from behind. I have to pull it out and do it. So these are what you call normaled, okay? And what normaled means is, okay, sorry to interrupt so quick. I know this is probably pretty strange, but a viewer out there named Lynn Carmichael reached out to me to let me know that I accidentally misspoke when talking about normaled when I should have said non-normal. So the part that I was just talking about, what I should have said is non-normaled, not normaled. Non-normaled means there's no connection between the top output and the bottom input. There's no physical connection internally in the unit. I describe it properly in the video, but I misquoted myself. So Len, thank you very much for pointing that to my attention. It's important to me that I get this right. For you viewers out there, ultimately I pulled the first video, which means I lost all the views on that, but that's not important to me. What's important to me is I get it right for all of you. So let's get back to the video. These are what you call normaled, okay? And what normaled means is what the top and the bottom, they're not connected in any way. So there's no physical connection inside the patch bay that connects the top row and the bottom row when they're normaled. Now, if you're not familiar with that, go back and watch my patch bay video. You'll need to see that first. You really should be watching that before this video. I should have said that in the beginning if I didn't. But these first 7 channels of the patch bay, those are, well, actually all 8 of them, they're all normal. So the top is not connected to the bottom. So, because obviously you wouldn't want the output of the mic preamp going into the input of the mic preamp. That wouldn't make any sense. Okay. So one of the things I did here, because these are all normaled, it means I can break the rule a little bit as far as maybe put an input on the top row, which is what I've done. And the reason I've done that in both the Warm Audio 73 EQ and the Heritage Audio 73 EQ, and I may get those particular models that not spot on, but you get what I'm saying. Obviously, you can use those 2 different ways. You can use it as the mic input, which is, we've already talked about that down below where that is. And so that's sending a signal that has to be amplified via the gain staging on the microphone preamp section of it to amplify that signal, and then of course send it through the EQ, and then of course output into your interface. Okay, but you can also use them as hardware inserts. If you're not familiar with what a hardware insert is, that's when you can go out of a particular track, out of your DAW, and you can send whatever's recorded on that track out of the output of your interface, and then that output would be connected to the input of a piece of hardware, let's say a compressor or an EQ, and then out of that compressor EQ back into the same input of the interface that you came out of. And what that does is, instead of using a plug-in, you can actually send that out to a hardware compressor versus a plug-in compressor, as an example. And so because both the Warm Audio and the Heritage Audio have EQs built into them, you can also use that as an insert. So I can send a track out of Pro Tools, as an example, and just process it through the EQ of either one of those units. And that's what I've done here. This one here at the top one is the Warm Audio insert. And of course, that insert it's expecting a line level signal coming from it. So that's when you're coming out of the output of your interface, going into that, and then and obviously it's going to go in to the insert here, the WA73 EQ. That's the input, and then the output of the 73 EQ would need to be patched into another input of your interface. And then that's how you would ultimately be able to patch that in. So hopefully that makes sense. So you would come out of the output of your interface, go into the insert here, into the insert of the WA73 as an example, then do a patch cable coming out of the WA73, which actually in this situation is basically right beside it, coming out of that and going back into the input of your interface. In Pro Tools, it requires you to use the same input and output. So if you're going out of output 3, you've got to come back in input 3. Some other DAWs will allow you to mix that up, from what I understand. But regardless, however your DAW works, that's how you'd have to do it. And so again, we kind of break the rule there, because I've got the input to the insert of the HA73 EQ and the input to the insert of the WA73 right above each other. And so what I didn't want to do is just waste those two spots on my DB25 cable to stick to the true, outputs on tops and inputs on the bottom, because it didn't make sense to do that. All right. So the next part, I'm going to talk about some unique uses, and that's with my Kemper. We're going to start here. And let me start by saying this. The reason I do this is because this particular interface back here, the Avid Carbon, you can also use that as your monitor controller for your studio monitors. And so you can connect up multiple devices, actually 2 different devices, actually 3 technically. You're going to have your computer audio that gets routed to it automatically. You're obviously going to have your DAW that comes out of it, whatever, sound is coming out of DAW. And then you can do a third for whatever you have connected to the first 2 inputs, channel 1 and channel 2. You can do that. So in other words, I've got my Kemper right here, the left and right of my Kemper out, automatically going into channels 1 and 2 of the Carbon. And so what that does is the Carbon will just take that signal coming in on the input and automatically direct it to the output when you've got that set up in Pro Tools, so that I can just play my guitar or whatever and just do my studio monitors without having to worry about pulling up Pro Tools or anything else, like you would just select an A, B, or C input on a monitor controller. So that's set up. I have that wired that way. So this is automatically going into channels 1 and 2. So therefore, also, when it comes time when I'm ready to record on my Kemper, if I want to record in stereo, I already have my Kemper left and right out going into channels 1 and 2. So I'd create a stereo track and assign those to inputs 1 and 2. In the event that I wanted to record just mono, then it would be according to that. I would just route the Kemper left, as an example, into the input 1 and record that as mono. And I wouldn't be doing anything in 2. So now you may be asking, and this is one of the unique uses of a patch bay. You may be saying, well, Barry, do you want to permanently take up channels 1 and 2 for your Kemper all the time? What happens if you need more inputs? Well, that's why a patch bay is so great. So if I want to I can override what goes into channels 1 and 2 simply by patching something into 1 and 2, and it will automatically disconnect it. And so I didn't talk about this before, but if you notice here, these are actually half normaled. And that's another unique use of the Kemper that I've kind of looked at all possibilities of it. Let's say, for example, half normaled means that what's coming in from the top, which is the output, is automatically routed to the bottom below it without needing a patch cable. Automatically, you don't have to do anything. It's automatic. That is the same thing for full normaled, okay? But for half normaled, and a unique use of that is I can also come out of here, out of the output, and then patch it into something else if I want. And what that's going to do is give me the signal from the Kemper left output going into the carbon 1 input here. And then if I come out of here, then it's and do it to an input of something else, another piece of hardware, an effects unit or something like that, then I can do that, and it's wiring that out. It's sending that signal into both locations. Now, you may ask why I do that. Well, you know, I may want to try and play around with. I have my floor pedals that I use for my guitar. I'm going to be wiring those all into the Redco patch bay. And so I could take that regular dry signal coming out of the Kemper and record just that and have just the dry raw signal. And then also I could record it with effects too. And so I would be recording 2 guitar tracks at the same time, one with no effects at all, and the other one with the effects return coming from whatever effects I'm running through. That way, if I decide I like it or I don't like it, I don't have to redo it. I've still got the original, but I'm able to use external effects, okay? And so that just creates options for me later on. And then, of course, if I want to use channel 1 and 2 for something else, then I just patch those in there. I patch something else into those, okay? And so that's what's unique about that. Now, in number 3 through 8 on this at the top, these are various pieces of hardware I have. So I've got output of a Pultec clone, 1176 clone, LA2A clone, another 1176 clone, and another pair of Pultec clones. And so they are automatically routed into channels 3 through 8. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 3 through 8 on the bottom. Now, oftentimes, so what that means is that way, remember when I'm in full normal, because channels 3 through 8, they're full normal, meaning that whatever is coming into whatever is in the input of the in the top one automatically gets routed to it. So in other words, this Pultec clone, this is the output of it. It's automatically going to go into the input of my interface on that particular channel, and that happens to be channel 8. And you'll find that duplicated in here in a second when I move the camera down to the second half of it. And so what that enables you to be able to do is be able to take certain key pieces of hardware that you use on a regular basis and do inserts that you don't want to have to use patch cables for, that they're automatically connected. So you just choose insert whatever that name of that insert, and it automatically, in this example of the last one, would automatically know that that insert is coming out, you know, is going out of channel 8 on your interface, and then back into, it's going to go out of channel 8 on the interface and then back in on channel 8 of the interface. So this is actually the output of that Pultec, and it's going to send it back into the input. The actual output of the interface is on the other section that you can't quite yet see with that camera that's right over there pointing at all of this. Okay, so that's the example of full normal. I never have to patch those in. They're automatically connected because they're full normal. So that means what's on the bottom is automatically connected internally inside the patch bay to it. So hopefully that makes a lot of sense, and it makes things easier. Again, these, just like I could take over and override what was going into channel 1 and 2 of my interface where I have the Kemper, I can do the same thing through 3 through 8, where normally those would be used as interfaces for specific pieces of hardware. But if I wanted to route other things in and out of it, then I would bypass those using patch cables, okay? So give me a second. I'm going to move the camera around, and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. For you, that was like a second. If that, for me, it was like a few minutes. Okay, so now we're going to go into the second half, or the second section of the patch bay right here. And so as we just talked about a second ago, on the top of this was my Kemper and all my various pieces of analog hardware, be it compressors, EQs, that kind of thing. And then my inputs of my interface being 1 through 8 on the bottom. So the outputs of those going into the inputs of my interface. Now over here we have the duplicate. So over here we have the interface on top. So that's the output of channels 1 through 8 on the top going into the input of 1 through 8 on the bottom. Now all of these here are just like on the, now the difference between this and the other is well, I'll talk about that in a second. So all these are full normal. So that means I don't need a patch cable to connect to the bottom. I don't need to do that, okay? And so if you notice back on the other section, remember I got my Kemper here. So this is the output of channels 1 and 2 going into the input of my Kemper. And you say, well, why are you going back into the input of your Kemper? Well, in case I want to reamp. And maybe I'll do a video on reamping at some point. But if you're not sure what that is, kind of Google that. You can find another video out there. Somebody on YouTube's done it, I'm sure. But that's out there in case I want to reamp. So 1 and 2 are automatically coming out and going to the inputs of my Kemper. Now, if you notice, coming over to the Kemper for the outputs, that was half normaled, meaning I could Y that out. I could send the outputs into something else. I don't need to do that with the inputs in the Kemper. I'm not going to send multiple things to the input at the Kemper, so I left that at full normaled. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, full normaled, whatever is connected to the top is automatically connected to the bottom internally within it once you set full normaling, okay? So again, we've got channels 1 through 8. Again, we've got down here below, so my interface 1 through 8 at the top, that's the output going into my Kemper. Then I have a Pultec EQ, a Pultec clone, 1176 clone, LA2A clone, another 1176 clone, and then a pair of Pultec clones there. All right, so that basically is the reverse of what you saw on the previous, well, let's call them one section. This is section 3 and 4, so this one basically is the reverse of what we saw for the most part on section 2, with the only difference being in the previous one that I talked about in section 2, starting with the outputs of the Kemper on 1 and 2 of section 2, going into the inputs of channel 1 and 2 of my interface, that being half normaled. Well, the outputs coming out of my interface going into the inputs of the Kemper, that's full normaled like I just talked about, okay? So that's all pretty self-explanatory right there. Again, when I want to use an insert within Pro Tools, if I've automatically got this particular 1176 clone here, it's automatically, so when I set it up in Pro Tools, I do the 1176 on channel 4 of my interface. So it sends it out via channel 4 into the input of the 1176 clone. And then on the previous section that you can't see on the other camera, but I guess I'll show it on this one, here it would come out of the 1176 and back into channel 4 of the interface, okay? And so no patching is required. But if I wanted to come out of channel 4 as an example, let's say I want to come out of 4, and I want to go into this, and I want to go into, well, I can't show you the whole thing, but if I want to come out of channel 4 and go into the input of another, let's say I want to go into one of the Pultec EQs, and I would come out of that, route that into the Pultec EQ, then I would do another patch cable coming out of that Pultec EQ going into the input of the 1176 clone, which means it would be going into the Pultec EQ first, and then out of that Pultec EQ, it would be automatically wired directly to the input of the 1176 clone, and then out of the 1176 clone back into the appropriate channel on the interface. So now I've got 2 pieces of hardware on one particular insert, okay? So that's another way of doing that. Going off to this last section over here, we have some other creative uses. Let me move this one cable out of the way, all right? And so over here in the output, I have another LA2A clone, and then I have another Pultec clone, and then I have a couple of empty slots in this lunchbox down here I don't have filled just yet. And then I have another compressor, 500 series compressor with another empty slot in my, so I have 3 slots empty in this BAE 500 series down here. So I went ahead and wired that in. That way when I put something in there, all I have to do is change the label and I'm good to go. And so these are all along through here, these first throughout this, be it the other LA2A clone as well as the pieces in the BAE down here, those are all on normal. So those are all completely normaled for that use, which means that the top is not connected to the bottom like we started out with my microphone preamps. These are not connected. So these are meant to be patched in. So if I want to patch into that BAE, I have to manually patch that. It's not automatically wired anywhere. Now where I get kind of creative is in these last 2 slots down here. And this is another great use of being able to be creative with certain things. There are times that I want to be able to record audio that's on my computer. The vast majority of that time, it's audio associated with video. If you go back and you see, I've got a couple of videos out there with me just playing around, playing guitar, doing some soloing and stuff over top of them. I did those for some friends. If you want to go look at it, go watch it. I'm not that great of a player, but to give you an idea how I did that, the background music that I'm soloing on top of are just backing tracks off of YouTube. And so what I did is what I have here is I have the output of my carbon, which is my monitor 1 and 2. Okay, that's my monitor 1 and 2. And I've got that automatically going into my studio monitors, which are my Adams studio monitors that you see right back there. There's one of them. And so before, this was wired a little bit differently, because now I can listen to my computer audio through my interface over here. Once I select that, when I play back, it's coming out of my monitor output of my interface. So now, as an example, if I want to get the sound from those backing tracks, then I would just patch in monitor out, go into one of the inputs of my interface. Let's say I go into channel 7, and then I do another one into the right side and go into channel 8. So now I can record that into Pro Tools, that input. And then if I want to be able to listen to that at the same time, then I could just come out of my outputs of that and outputs of 7 and 8 and go into the Adams. So go into the monitors. Or actually, I would just change the input, so it's monitoring through Pro Tools. So I wouldn't really need to route it back. So I can take that, I can come out of my outputs of my monitor. This is a unique situation. Now, before, I actually had a little 1/8" mini balanced plug, the headphone output basically came out of my Mac Pro, and then I would wire that into that. And then that would go to the input of my monitor controller. But because this interface gives me the ability to do that, now I can just take that and whatever I want. Like there's a couple, like Mark Miller, is that his name? Martin Miller. He does some killer jams that he does. They've got one where they do a Rush, they do a Rush kind of a medley of different Rush songs. They do what else? They do a Queen one. I think they do a Genesis one, and they also do a Smoke on the Water. I can't. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I can't. I'm drawing a blank. But anyway, they have these medleys on there, and I love listening to those in my car. So I would just go out of the output of YouTube and that. So I'm not having to use my phone to stream it in Bluetooth and get something else that would stop that from happening. I would just record that coming out, record that into Pro Tools, bounce it down as an MP3. Now I can listen to my car whenever I want. And so those are some kind of cool uses. And all this Patchbay at the end is doing is when you see these hardware pieces here, some down here, and then those back over there, I'm not going to go crawling underneath there every time I want to repatch something to go over and pulling these racks off the wall and repatch things as I need it. Again, I'm actually downsizing. I went from 22 in, 24 out down to 8 in, actually 10 out, because it has a separate set of monitor outputs, so you don't have to waste 2 of your outputs for that. And a Patchbay gives me the ability to add all of this gear and be flexible with it however I want. And then another thing I'm going to be doing right now is on my particular interface, it has 8 microphone preamps, traditional XLR preamps on it. And then it also has 8 inputs via DB25, which is wired into here. These inputs on here and outputs, are via DB25. So they're meant for line level. So if I actually want to record a microphone connected to this, currently I'd have to physically go back there and set that up. But that's what I plan to do next, is add those into my Redco down here where those mic pre's in the back are automatically connected here. So then I can patch into those particular mic preamps, because you can either use one or the other. I can use channel 1 as a mic preamp, and then that would disable channel 1 on the DB25 connector as an example. So it gives me tons and tons and tons of flexibility to be able to do a lot with a minimum amount of I/O. And it makes it super easy to patch things in, things like that. And so anyway, that's how mine is particular wired. So I'm curious, I know I may have kind of gone over some of this stuff a little bit too fast or not properly explained it. I'm going to ask that you put some comments down below. Tell me what you think about it. Tell me some creative uses you found that maybe I'm not doing here. Give me some ideas on how to better utilize my Patchbay to give me even some more creative opportunities. I would appreciate that as well. So put your comments down below. I really appreciate it. But hey, if you like the content, just like I always say, if you like the content here, hit that like, subscribe button. Actually, it's probably over there now. I'm trying to do that differently, so I got to point over there, that like, subscribe, notification bell over there. Really helps me grow this channel. I'd really appreciate it. If you like what I'm doing, then help me out. That's all I'm asking. Maybe I can make a couple $100 every year. That's probably the pace I'm on right now. And buy some more gear with it. But anyway, I don't do this for money. I do this for fun. So anyway, thank you for watching. I truly appreciate it. Hopefully you've learned something. And I've had fun doing it. I love talking about this stuff. And even though I'm long-winded, and I apologize for that. So until next time, I hope all of you out there have a great, wonderful day. I really do mean that. Have a great day. Thanks.